I was scrolling through my past videos when I found my Hot Wheels launcher from about 3 months ago. It was like watching paint dry, so I thought why not do it again, but much better. I don't want to use motors in this build, and I'm actually going to resort to using rubber bands to propel the car forward. And at the end I'm going to test it against balloons to see how many I can pop. To get this working, I need a long barrel to load the car, a track or slot on each side to hold a beam that is hooked into the rubber bands that can push the car, and then something at the front to also hold the rubber bands. I started with a 6 stud wide plate and laid out a fairly long line of them, and then I realized I have the perfect part for the top of the build. I have these car roof parts that will work perfectly as the long roof that holds the car in place. I lined the inside of those pieces with more plates and then added a gray line of tiles to make it much sturdier. I made sure the car I was using would fit in a 4 stud wide area, and it fit almost perfectly. There was no tightness, so it has less friction with the walls, but it isn't too wide that it would start turning sideways and come out of the barrel not going forward. To make it all work much better, I added a bunch of 2x4 tiles on the track the car would ride on, and then made the walls with these panel pieces I had a bunch of. But because I'm using Lego to build this, the plates at the bottom are way too flimsy, so I added a bunch of white plates and connected everything together to make it all much sturdier. After that was done, I needed an end on the barrel that could stop the pushing beam and a place to fasten the rubber bands to. I used these small Technic axles combined with some dome pieces which seem good, at least for now. With all that done, I needed to add the rubber bands on each side. Well, it turns out I don't have any super long rubber bands, so after a slight moment of worrying the project was a complete failure, I decided I could take a bunch of same size rubber bands and make a chain of them. By looping each end of the rubber bands together, I created a very simple chain that took less than a minute to make, which reminds me of something you could do that's really simple and takes much less than a minute. Wink wink. Once the rubber band was made, I built a small box thing at the back of the launcher and then put a top on. Usually at this point of the build I would explain a huge problem that I have to fix, but thankfully for once everything worked out. The car fit perfectly in the barrel and rode smoothly. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that this build has no motors or mechanical parts, or I'm just the best Lego designer ever. Either way, with all that done, I needed to build a bar that goes behind the car in order to propel it forward. I used some white bricks and made something that had a small bar sticking out on each side so that I could hook the rubber band to it, and then tried to make a way to secure the rubber band to it. Decided I didn't need to and just put these triangle pieces on the sides. And with all that built, it was time to give it the very first test. I put the car in the barrel, pulled the car back, the rubber band's working perfectly, and let go. Well, that leaves a bit to be desired, but at least the launching part works out as well as I could have imagined. There are 3 problems with this. 1, the rubber bands come flying off when I launch the Hot Wheels. 2, the beam hits so hard that it starts to wrench the front of the building apart, because it's just so good. And 3, you aren't subscribed, you freeloading little— Oh, and 4, the roof of the barrel is way too flimsy. To combat the rubber band issue, I built small fins on either side of the front of the launcher and then made 2 small holes in each one to hold one end of the rubber band. Then I took the long part of the pushing beam apart and added another small hole on each side to hook the other end in. And with all that done, I still have like 10 more things to do. So far this build is basically rubber bands, a dope looking Hot Wheels, and a bunch of gray and white Lego pieces. Not exactly the most visually appealing thing I've ever built. So to combat the drabness, I got out my macaroni drawer. No, my Lego macaroni drawer. I have a bunch of these weird blue curve pieces and I think they're gonna look really good, almost like an energy wave coursing up the barrel of the launcher. But before I add them, I have to strengthen the top of the barrel so it doesn't bend so much. I took off all the gray tiles from the top and put a bunch of gray plates on top. Then I put back the tiles and put all the blue curves on top, alternating which side the bend is on. Then at the back I made some sort of generator looking thing to cap off the energy swirl, and after adding some gray tiles to make it all look a bit smoother, I was ready to tackle the most annoying problem. Because of how much force the rubber bands pull the car forward with, when the back beam hits the front of the barrel it starts wrenching the pieces apart, so I need to add some sort of damper to bounce it back, without slamming on the pieces. I have these rubber Technic pieces that will work pretty well, so I took some small 1x1 pieces and put them in these Technic pieces, then used a small axle connected to the rubber pieces. And with that working much better than before, I decided that this build would be much better if it had some sort of handle. So I got a bunch of 4x4 round pieces and made a handle on top of some white pieces I used to make a sort of base. Unfortunately, but evidently, this isn't actually sturdy enough to support the whole launcher when the rubber bands are being pulled back. So I took a long axle and put it down the middle of the handle. But in order to make the whole thing stronger, I had to pull out some of the pieces from the base and put in these 2x2 round bricks with an axle hole in the middle. Then I tested it once more, and to my delight, the handle actually held up when I pulled the rubber band back. And with all that built, this build was complete. Now I could put it up against balloons, so I biked down to my local dollar store and bought a 15-pack of yellow balloons. I decided to test out the launcher without adding any pointy thing to the front of the car first, so I blew up a balloon and built a stand to hold it in place. I pulled back the launcher and... Yep, I'm definitely not going to be able to make this pop on its own. So I decided to use a sewing pin on the front of the car to pop the balloons. I got out some masking tape and tried to tape the pin to the car, but the tape wouldn't stick to either, so I ended up trying electrical tape. It wasn't much better, but worked just enough to hold the pin in place. I set up another balloon on the stand and launched the car again. So that was really cool, but now I want to see if it can pop 4 balloons. I lined them all up, pulled the Hot Wheels launcher back, and... somehow I managed to pop one, miss the next, then bounce and pop the third one. It even bounced on the pin. I don't even know how. So now I have 2 extra balloons that haven't popped, so I decided to take them outside and pretend it's some sort of target practice. So I set up the balloons randomly in my backyard and took aim. It took 2 tries on the first balloon, and I had to get pretty low to the ground, but the POV turned out pretty cool. Then I went for the second one. It may have taken 4 attempts to hit it, but when I did, the slow-mo was probably the best part of this entire video. And with all the balloons popped and a working LEGO Hot Wheels launcher, I could finally be satisfied with a much less paint-dryish LEGO Hot Wheels launcher. Please do consider subscribing.